I'm Dr. G4, and welcome to Proto-Future, a podcast about model trains, and also somehow neuropsychology, recorded from Noma, Washington, D.C. I really don't know how I get to all of these places. This is bonus episode 4, Autism in STEM. In this episode, I'll narrate a single-author, peer-reviewed scientific paper I wrote and published last year. Extra special news. At much insistence, by him, not me, because apparently my work was so unlistenable he had to, out of the goodness of his professional audio engineer heart, correct it, Roger Coleman has remastered the Borealis series of ever so long ago. All of his remasters have replaced the original podcast episode audio files, so go re-download and re-listen to my earlier cringy work speedrunning Minneapolis, Chicago, and a bunch of airports, as well as accidentally being shuffled onto a train car with governors, CEOs, and other far more meaningful and accomplished people than my little naive self. And extra special thanks to Roger himself. In gratitude, I've given him a month's worth of Patreon earnings, which isn't much, but I thought it was only fair for the work he did. Additionally, given Roger's Borealis remasters and the previous bonus episode this past month on non-Euclidean transit, I thought that I could round out a month's worth of content with a second bonus episode. While I have mentioned before toying with the idea of an episode on science and tiny trains, explaining the scientific process and the importance of scientific literacy, I think at least equally important is direct contact with science itself, something which far too few people have these days. Especially with the free availability of so many open-access journals, not requiring a subscription fee to see the cutting-edge science itself, and with Google Scholar being similarly freely available to anyone with a computer, it disheartens me greatly how many people don't remember basic facts from high school and instead turn to AI slop generators for information that confirms their pre-existing and horrendously inconsistent beliefs that wouldn't survive a yoctosecond of scrutiny. In fact, it aggravates me deeply that I'm making so many sacrifices, but others aren't. Many people chalk my car-hating fervor up to being a radical youngin', although when this episode comes out, I will have just passed 30, which I don't quite think qualifies me as a youngin' anymore. But what actually happened was that I used to drive a lot and road trip everywhere, but I read the scientific articles, and I found out that the conclusion of robust research is that cars are incorrect. Therefore, I changed my opinions to hate cars with reckless abandon because it's the right thing to do, not because it's popular or even what I believed previously. The same thing goes for trying to be vegan. I wasn't born that way, I wasn't raised that way, I chose to be that way because the evidence demands it. And same thing with hating small-town American conservatives and rural religious shit for brains, because any remotely intellectually honest discussion on the matter concludes, as have I, that you must be a good person, pro-LGBTQ, pro-choice, anti-racism, anti-ableism, and anti-Israel first, before you are allowed to have prosperity of your own. Otherwise, you are a greedy, selfish solipist that stands in the way of progress. And same thing with rail transit being better than buses, bicycles being preferable to everything, and religion simply being wrong. Hell, I grew up literally an altar boy who hated bicycles, and yet couldn't deny the ironclad logic and science that made me not mournfully, but proudly abandon my errant ways. Sure, if I am wrong about something, let me know. I've changed my opinions before, and I will change them again as better information and more convincing arguments come along. But until such a point as that, what I say is what I would like to think is most aligned with humanity's best attempts at understanding the world, and to disagree with my postulations is to do so in contradiction to evidence, validity, and reality itself. So, what is this paper and where did it all come from? Well, I'm autistic. Obviously, I like trains, but specifically a type of high-functioning autism that makes it somewhat inobvious to my interlocutors. So sometimes, quite often in fact, this leads to some sort of strain in socialization, which I can occasionally pick up on but never know how to fix, typically in people who, for some inane reason, prefer formality over content, who are solidly inclined to mercilessly shoot the messenger despite maxims to the contrary. When I was young, this gave me horrible anxiety and made me think I was defective. It was a very unpleasant time. With age, though, I've noticed the same patterns over and over again, seeing people make the same mistakes and react negatively to the exact same things, but knowing from previous experience just how completely incapable I am of matching their expectations. Things came to a head in October 2024 when a supposedly close friend and a supposedly supportive administrator complained to the Office of Ethics and Compliance about completely inane statements that were, to my best understanding, completely true, not intended with any malice or derogation, but nonetheless hurt their feelings, which they had yet to master despite their adulthood and advanced education. And thusly was the messenger once again well and truly hoist. However, this time with the benefit of hindsight, and in fact from previous help that the same administrator herself had offered me on a very similar occasion dealing with some fascist hippies in the astronomy department who also demanded social conformity, self-doubt no longer plagued me, and I knew not just for certain, but for scientific certain that they were in error, that their feelings were wrong, and that they were behaving illogically and in contradiction with evidence. Partially as a logical and emotional response to the entire issue, partially because I was undergoing a legitimate and complete mental breakdown as a result of the affair, I took 5 days off of work and, with tears streaming down my face, proceeded to catalog almost 200 scientific articles which corroborated my perspective and statements. For the next 2 full years, I refined this 3,000-word scientific review article demonstrating the error of their feelings. Of course, I submitted to Science and Nature, and was of course rejected. Oddly enough, it was also rejected from the much less prestigious PLOS Bio, but I finally got the perspective to a point where I was mostly happy with it and decided to submit to one of the highest-ranking journals in microbial physiology, a journal to which I had previously submitted and for whom I had met and was impressed by some of the staff and editors, the open-access journal MBio. Incredibly, astonishingly, and just as I was in the midst of writing my dissertation, I got a notification that my article was under review. It had passed the initial scrutiny of the assigned editor and was forwarded on to other anonymous scientists within the field of neuropsychiatry for the ever-important peer review. Just as I was finishing up my last few experiments, I got my reviewer comments back, and they were unexpectedly glowing. Reviewer 1 said, "This article is timely and addresses an important topic. Overall, I believe it should be published." And Reviewer 2 said, glowingly, "This is a timely and important article addressing the need for a concerted effort in STEM workplaces to enact inclusive practices with neurodiverse scientists in mind. The manuscript is well-researched and effectively weaves experiences as described by neurodiverse scientists with evidence-based research findings. This article effectively presents the characteristics of neurodiverse scientists that can present challenges in the workforce while emphasizing that these are not just things to fix or cure. This article is significant and it is essential for biomedical journals to present such content." With that resounding endorsement of my perspective, I finished writing and defending my dissertation, and then spent a few weeks furiously addressing the hundreds of reviewer comments. Finally, after almost 2 years of effort, the following perspective was published just last fall. Please do follow the link in the show notes to the article if you want to follow along with any one of the 151 citations sprinkled throughout the article. MBio, Open Access, Conduct of Scientific Research, Perspective, 19 November 2025. Why Can't You Be Normal? An Urgent Call for Social and Institutional Inclusivity of Neurodivergent Scientists in STEM Workplaces. Author, John Houston Gardiner IV, ORCID ID 0009000031828722. Total downloads 31,267. Abstract. The number of autistic people is growing rapidly. Among other traits, autism results in significantly more rational and objective thought patterns, and thus neurodivergent students pursue education and employment in STEM fields at higher rates. However, autistic scientists experience discrimination and more career setbacks than neurotypical scientists. Despite the myth of scientific meritocracy, there are pervasive social expectations to behave normally and fit in, encouraging camouflaging of autistic traits, which can contribute to anxiety, depression, and suicidality. The literature is conclusive. It is the obligation not of autistic scientists to change, but of their managers, coworkers, administrative, and society to be more inclusive, accommodating, and tolerant of neurodivergent perspectives in work environments. A demographic of growing importance. Autism is a neurodevelopmental phenotype characterized by challenges with socialization. Officially classified as an intellectual disability, the term neurodivergent, antonym neurotypical, is preferred to represent the diversity of phenotypes and redefine autism from a deficit-oriented disease to a neurologically based difference inextricably linked with one's identity and perspectives. While more complicated, varied, and encompassing related or comorbid conditions such as ADHD or undiagnosed twice exceptionality, for the purposes of this perspective, neurodivergence is used interchangeably with autism, as many of the findings and implications herein are broadly shared. Additionally, findings for the former diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome in some citations are combined with autism. For this reason, over 87% of autism stakeholders prefer identity-first language, autistic person, over person-first language, person with autism. The number of autistic individuals is increasing rapidly. The CDC and other groups have identified a significant growth in prevalence from 0.62% in 2002 to almost 3% in 2020. The cause of this rise is hotly debated between an improvement in awareness leading to increased diagnoses of a fixed number of cases or an actual increase in incidence of autism. While the latter seems to be at least partially true, irrespective of the mechanism, that the number of diagnoses is growing means autistic individuals will only become more common in both classrooms and workplaces. It is thus that inclusivity of neurodivergence is an increasingly pressing matter. Since autism results in a, quote, consistent bias towards deliberative reasoning, unquote, and enhanced rationality and objectivity, it should come as no surprise that autistic individuals are more likely than neurotypical individuals to seek education and employment in STEM fields. Despite this, disabled individuals remain underrepresented in STEM, are less likely to persist in undergraduate education, experience bullying and discrimination as graduate students, are less likely to be employed, have lower salaries and are less likely to get tenure, are routinely dehumanized, and overall experience, quote, pervasive obstacles rooted in bias and ableism that impact professional relationships, unquote. While there is a tendency in the literature to lump neurodiversity in with other disabilities, which sometimes require very different accommodations, resulting in a dearth of autism-specific research, various analyses corroborate these challenges as specifically pertaining to neurodivergence as well. Due to the growing number of autistic people and their predilection for, but significant difficulties in pursuing STEM fields, any problems faced by neurodivergent scientists or their employers are slated to increase in prevalence. It is therefore advisable for the scientific community to not just understand, but practice more acceptance of neurodivergence. This perspective argues that neurodivergence leads to more objective and logical behaviors, which, while potentially conflicting with neurotypical norms, need not be changed for properly functioning research environments, and that demanding conformity of autistic scientists is actively harmful to their mental health, robbing the scientific community of their contributions. Thinking deliberately. Besides a predilection for rationality and objectivity, neurodivergent individuals exhibit altered speech and vocabularies, repetitive calming behaviors, difficulties with self-expression, tendencies for rigidity and literalism, and, sadly, higher rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide. To be sure, there are benefits to being autistic, but there have been unfortunately many attempts to cure autism by separating problematic and advantageous traits, particularly in the pre-2010 literature, although this may not even be possible as many autistic people consider their autism integral to their worldview. Interestingly, neurodivergent individuals have difficulty with false belief reasoning, implying impaired theory of mind. However, recent studies have cast doubt on theory of mind as a causative mechanism of autism, and the literature is moving away from the theory of mind and empathy deficit models of autism as oversimplified, negatively mischaracterizing, dehumanizing, and, quote, zombie pseudoscience, unquote. Nevertheless, autism remains classically associated with an inability to recognize others' emotions and behaviors perceived as unempathetic or oblivious. This may be due to multiple factors. Autism is known for inflexibility, executive function deficits, and, reminiscent of false belief challenges, poor imagination, even to the extent that autistic readers prefer nonfiction literature. While each of these traits is either debated or subtle, this may stem from neurodivergent individuals' challenges with cognitive load, evidenced by increased memory and performance impairment than neurotypicals when distracted. It is even thought that a quintessential trait of autism, the inability to maintain eye contact, is a functional behavior to modulate cognitive demands during interlocution. Although debated, and while research does not often reveal any major differences from neurotypicals, it is reasonable to conclude that, in complex, real-world, social situations, the difficulties with flexibility, empathy, counterfactual reasoning, and imagination can combine and may exceed the available cognitive bandwidth, making it difficult or impossible for autistic people to put their acquired knowledge into practice. Incidentally, this may explain both the primary challenge of autism, social awkwardness, as well as the variability in the literature. In essence, Grant et al. Summarized it neatly over 2 decades ago. Quote, "It appears that autistic children's difficulties in passing standard false belief tasks derive from a cognitive requirement of the tasks and not from a flawed conceptual understanding of belief." A matter of life and death. Unfortunately, these divergent thought patterns of autistic individuals are not merely alternate strategies of perception, but often a source of friction with neurotypical peers, significantly impacting quality of life. Social camouflaging, colloquially termed masking, is the deliberate suppression of autistic traits to behave, quote, normally, and includes widely varying and contextual behaviors such as forcing eye contact or suppressing stimming motions, i.e. fiddling with fidget spinners or pens or bopping limbs, all the way to intensely self-policing language choices and obsessively studying and conforming to neurotypical expectations. Although initially posited to explain the underdiagnosis of autism in females, while camouflaging is more common among autistic females due to gendered socialization, it should not be mistaken as an exclusively female female trait, as it is also present in males and most prominent in non-binary individuals. Camouflaging research has only recently taken off, with PubMed indicating about 75% of papers having been published in the last 5 years. Camouflaging is even observed as being similar to how racial minorities alter their behavior to perform whiteness and fit in with the dominant culture. While there are, of course, many confounding factors to this comparison, it at least implies a common intersectional conflict originating from shared in-group out-group dynamics. Camouflaging is often motivated by feelings of social outcast and a pressure to conform, and frequently results in stress, exhaustion, and an eroded sense of self, anxiety, depression, autistic burnout, suicidal tendencies, and overall lower quality of life. As superbly and succinctly examined by both Mandy and Hullen colleagues, upon first reading their paper, this author burst into tears and ugly cried for 90 minutes from the validation of lifelong issues. Camouflaging takes extreme effort to monitor and deliberately suppress one's natural tendencies, but represents a catch-22 wherein camouflaging may be necessary to ameliorate bullying, gain acceptance, have healthy social relationships, or, this author's edition, maintain employment. Worse still, it seems that classically autistic comorbidities such as ADHD or oppositional defiance disorder transform into anxiety and depression as neurodivergent individuals age, learn self-control, and proceed to mask their behaviors. In effect, neurodivergent people are not given the option of having anxiety or depression, but instead may only choose how it is administered, behave authentically but be socially isolated for their differences, or conform to neurotypical expectations and suffer the problems associated with self-suppression. This results in a minority tax, wherein, as is the case for other minority groups, neurodivergent scientists are expected to deal with all the typical hardships of graduate school and tenure-track positions, and then some. It is thusly that efforts to modify an autistic person's behavior have been likened to the resoundingly unethical gay conversion therapy. Opinion hypothesis towards a more inclusive science. A major difficulty with autism is the elusiveness of the symptoms. In contrast to physical disabilities with tangible needs, e.g. ramps for wheelchair access or ample and appropriate seating, which are made less arduous with social acceptance or institutional flexibility, e.g. expedience in addressing those needs, neurodivergence is treated largely with social acceptance and institutional flexibility. In this author's experience, the single most common accommodation requested by neurodivergent students is patience, which is understandably difficult to make policy. Further, being a largely invisible disability, it is difficult to parse out which aspects of autistic behavior are merely personality and which are unchangeable disability traits. While musing whether this is even possible is beyond the scope of this perspective, in this author's experience, the current STEM culture is much more inclined to statements like, "Why can't you be normal?" and "You should learn to behave like a normal person," actual sentences said to this author. While there is almost no research on the subject, it is easily inferred that autistic individuals are predisposed to interpersonal conflicts in the workplace. Besides the robust findings that autistic individuals are often more logical, rational, objective, and unbiased, there is also evidence that they prioritize common moral norms, preferentially utilize utilitarian ethics, are less susceptible to the bystander effect, less complacent with the status quo, and more likely to intervene even if intervention isn't popular, and may even possess supermorality, behaving more morally than neurotypicals, and being more distressed by immorality. Furthermore, autistic individuals are often mistaken as unempathetic, have more cerebral, deadpan, and self-deprecating humor, and possess low respect for non-specific virtues such as loyalty and sanctity. It should thus not be surprising that the combination of all of these traits can often be a recipe for workplace disaster. In trying to improve acceptance and productivity of neurodivergent employees, Seitz and Smith identified 5 strategies. Managers should be compassionate, flexible, motivated by policy, give explicit instructions, and provide ongoing social support. A recent roundtable of autistic scientists echoed these and added that autistic researchers should be treated as equals, that their perspectives be appreciated and validated, and that autism is not something to be, quote, fixed. While no list could ever be exhaustive, this author would like to add some salient points. First, the role of patience cannot be understated. Given that autistic people exhibit slower, more deliberate reasoning, must decode social subtleties, and are more likely to be intellectually disabled, simply accepting that it might take longer for autistic individuals to understand something, or that they go about understanding things in different ways, would be extremely helpful. Additionally, allowing neurodivergent individuals to behave naturally rather than expecting conformity, and being open to different perspectives, workflows, learning strategies, humor styles, and limitations would significantly benefit the mental health of autistic and neurotypical coworkers alike. Most importantly, all of these recommendations should be reflected at the administrative level, as rigid policies or a bureaucratic unwillingness to accommodate neurodivergence can undo the work of an accepting lab. Administrators and managers should be empowered and encouraged through holistic funding or reward systems to make individual, contextually derived exceptions directly at the point of conflict, especially because targeted accommodations would not impose a broader institutional burden. As noted by Bilek, quote, "Many autistic people regularly work to develop an expertise in social etiquette while remaining stubbornly inept at putting this theoretical expertise into practical usage, unquote. Ergo, there are at least some things for which autistic individuals simply cannot meet neurotypical expectations, and one would be loath to hold all to standards which only some can meet. An excellent example of how contextually derived accommodations might work can be found in autistic individuals' hypersensitivity to stimuli, particularly sounds. Autism is comorbid with misophonia, a neurological condition wherein very specific sounds, such as chewing noises or a certain musical beat, elicit intense emotional responses of anger or distress. While enforcing a university-wide ban on chewing noises would be less than practical, and navigating different music tastes is part of the territory of coworker relationships, holding an autistic scientist to the same standards as a neurotypical one by forcing them to suck it up and deal with the distracting or triggering sounds would put an asymmetric burden on neurodivergent employees. In these examples, requiring that eating be conducted in break rooms or that headphones be worn when in the lab space would not significantly encumber neurotypical workers, but would make a humongous difference for the neurodivergent scientists' productivity and quality of life. Whereas global policies to accommodate the whole spectrum of neurodivergence might be impossible to codify, this does not equate to neurodivergent workers being undeserving of accommodations made specific to each situation. It is important to note that this author is not advising policy anarchy, jettisoning all convention at an autistic person's discretion the moment they walk in the door. However, it is undeniable that a strict interpretation of all institutional policies in all situations is not expressly necessary for a functional workplace. At a previous position, it was once made clear to this author that continued employment was dependent on walking less flamboyantly through hallways, and that sometimes a degree of patience or compassion would go very far to improving working environments for all involved. In many cases, simple misunderstandings are far too quickly escalated and result in, or demand, camouflaging, directly harming the neurodivergent worker. When an autistic individual is expected to follow a rule seen as arbitrary, illogical, or subjective, the tendencies for rule-following and social rigidity conflict with the hyper-rationality and intolerance of uncertainty, causing a double bind which is, in this author's direct experience, existentially debilitating. This is neither compassionate nor necessary for the production of good research or maintenance of amicable coworker relationships. As observed by one neurodivergent scientist, isn't it ironic how inflexible neurotypical society can be, despite the traditional focus on autistic inflexibility? Conclusion. Employing neurodivergent individuals does not burden organizations. Neurodivergent employees are more likely to report organizational inefficiencies, and science would do well to harness autism's predilection for unbiased, rational instincts. This can only be achieved by managers, administrators, and coworkers accepting the limitations of autistic colleagues through empathy, flexibility, and targeted accommodations. Historically, early disclosure of autism diagnosis was considered advisable as it sets realistic expectations, increases understanding, ameliorates the need for camouflaging, and improves personal relationships. Indeed, many of the suggestions offered herein are dependent on full knowledge by both parties. However, the current U.S. political climate is clashing with established science, enacting policies towards autistic people which are, quote, terrifying, quote, dehumanizing, quote, dangerous, and, quote, eugenic. That the current U.S. administration is unashamedly emulating the first steps of Nazi Germany's genocides by establishing a registry of neurodivergent individuals is, quote, gravely concerning, unquote. It should, therefore, be understood that disclosure of or formalizing a diagnosis in the present climate may be expressly dangerous, and that, even in the absence of medical proof, flexibility, accommodations, and patience should be offered freely and anyway by managers and administrators to anyone in need. Autistic students pursue STEM careers at significantly higher rates. However, despite the myth of meritocracy, STEM majors are not more accepting of autism. Neurodivergent individuals face ubiquitous obstacles to achievement and pervasive gaslighting that autism is a disabling defect which must be corrected, particularly as productivity shifts from more regimented classrooms to more social workplaces. Research unequivocally demonstrates that asking autistic individuals to behave normally increases anxiety, depression, and suicidality. Autism is not a deficit, but a different, equally valid perspective which should be welcomed and appreciated. The scientific literature is conclusive. It is society which must change, and not its autistic members. In an interview with CityCast Pittsburgh, disability advocate Elisa Grishman probably put it best wherefrom the challenges of disability originate.
People use the phrase confined to a wheelchair and wheelchair bound, and those are horrible, horrible things to say because they make wheelchairs sound like some imprisoning thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in a world that had great sidewalks, sliding doors, ramps, I wouldn't be disabled. I'd be able to get everywhere just the same as, you know, someone who's currently able-bodied is able to do now. It's the world that creates the disability, not my chair.
Acknowledgements. This author would like to explicitly exempt their PI and thesis committee from any negative inferences regarding the nature of this work. While no faculty member is perfect, this group has largely been accepting, understanding, and patient, especially with regards to autism-related traits and behaviors. This article is dedicated to the late Dr. Eric Crandall and all other neurospicy scientists, students, researchers, STEM aficionados, and enthusiasts of evidence-based, logically valid explorations of the world we find ourselves in. It's not just you. Some of these normies truly defy coherent explanation. In the words of Persephone from Aeneas Mitchell's hit Broadway musical, Hadestown, "Some flowers bloom where the green grass grows. Our praise is not for them. But to the ones who bloom in the bitter snow, we raise our cups to them." This has been bonus episode 4 of the Proto-Future podcast, Autism in STEM. The theme music is Spark of Life by Benjamin Lazarus through Tribe of Noise. I would like to thank my extremely generous and patient patrons Pedro Reyes, Ron Kleiss, Bill Ford, Linda Eskin, Roger Coleman, and Billy Brown. And extra special thanks to my friends at CityCast Pittsburgh for allowing me to use the audio interview of Elisa Grishman, Megan Harris, Mallory Falk, Francesco DeBecco, Sophia Lowe, and Owen Gaby. If you would like to know more, you can visit the website at www.bgtmrring.org. That's Bravo Golf Tango, Michael Romeo Romeo, Indigo November Golf, Oscar Romeo Golf. To listen to the Manifesto and Prologue series, watch the Modern Modeling Clinic anthology, or read the free-to-access Patreon production blog. And please consider donating as little as $1 a month to help defer hosting, equipment, and travel costs and support what I do. This content is CAN-credentialed. You can report instances of harassment, abuse, or other harm to their hotline at 617-249-4255 or on their website at creatoraccountabilitynetwork.org. To the best of my knowledge, this podcast is entirely free of content generated, produced, edited, or modified in any way by AI. This podcast was written, recorded, and produced on the ancestral lands of the Susquehannock, Lenni Lenape, Munsee Lenape, Canarsie, Piscataway, Anacostan, Patawomack, Mattaponi, Powhatan, Chickahominy, Yuctanund, Paspageh, Kiskiak, Kagutan, Lumbee, Chesapeake, Nansemond, Weraskoyak, Nottoway, Cuyocahannock, and Appomattox tribes. I would like to thank them for their historical stewardship of central and eastern Pennsylvania, lower New York, Washington, D.C., and Tidewater, Virginia. Thank you very much for listening. Keep riding trains, keep punching Nazis, and keep building a better future.